Welcome to Lesson 1 of Shamanic Journeying. From an energetic point of view, you could say that we, as human beings, perceive the world through 4 different means. Or you could say we perceive the world in 4 different ways. Our whole universe, whatever we see, can be placed into one of these 4 categories. Matter, mind, soul, and spirit. And if you imagine these 4 fields as a pyramid, then you could say that the bottom layer of this pyramid is matter. And what you can say about matter is that it's very structured. It's extremely structured. Just look around you. Everything keeps its shape. It's very rigid in a sense, structure. And we perceive matter through the 5 senses, through sort of body perception. The layer on top of body perception is mind. Mind is thinking in words. And if you look at mind, you can clearly see that mind still has structure. We think in a structured way. But it definitely has less structure than matter. Yeah. Another thing you could say about mind is that mind, because it's 1 step higher in the pyramid, you could say it's 1 step less structured, does have an influence on matter. Mind rules over matter. The mere fact that you can hear me is an expression of that. The thought of a microphone shaped matter into a microphone. So you could say mind has power over matter. Has less structure than matter, but still has structure. And the layer on top of mind has even less structure. That's the world of soul, the world of feelings. And you know, feelings don't have much structure. 1 feeling flows over in the other. It's like water. It's not that structured. You could say it has less structure than mind. And because it has less structure than mind, it's finer, it's deeper. It has power over mind. And the layer on top of soul is spirit. And spirit is the field of intention, of conviction, of belief, or of the will. It's directional energy. And that has even less structure than water. You could say the will has no shape. Soul, or feelings, you still can perceive as feelings and as inner images. All inner images are a representative of feelings. So you still can see soul. You still can observe soul, because there is still shape. And there is a feeling or an image. If you come into the field of spirit, which is the top of the pyramid, and which has less structure, it's more like gas, there is nothing you can relate to, because there is no shape anymore. And what you try to do in all therapeutical work, but for instance also in Shamanic Journeying, you try to get into this pyramid on the highest possible level. Because the higher you get into this pyramid, the more what you do there will have its effect in everything that's under there. To put it different, if you want to change your life and the way you live, you can start by following a different diet. Become a vegetarian or whatever, you start a different diet. So you try to change your whole life by influencing matter. might be a very good idea, but still, because you start so low in the pyramid, it will take very long before your mind has changed. The way you feel has changed. That what you want has changed. So what you try to do is you try to, if you want to change your life, if you start thinking in a different way, and for instance all this positive affirming is based on that, if you think in a different way, you influence thinking and you influence the body. If you get into all forms of emotional work, you get into the field of feelings, because when something changes there, it changes the feeling, it changes the mind, and it changes the body. And feelings have very much different levels. Everybody knows that. You know, you have superficial feelings and you have very deep feelings. And you could say the higher you get into the pyramid, so the thinner all things you can perceive are, the deeper it goes. And if you want to change your life, you try to get as deep as possible. And the deeper you come, the less personal it is, because there's less structure. You could say that this high level is something like the collective unconscious, because the very deep feelings that define our lives, which are the basis of our lives, are unconscious. All these deep feelings are laid within a very early childhood. In general, we are not aware of the definitions. We only become aware through our lives of the consequences of that view. So, what you try to do in shamanic journeying, you try to shift your attention. You try to shift your attention away from the daily things, because if you look inside yourself, you can really see that all day long your focus is on the same things. Is on mind, is on matter, is on a very superficial layer within the field of feelings, because emotion is only an extremely small part of the field of feelings. The field of feelings is enormous. When you enter a house, you can feel you're in a different space. That's feeling. If you drive a car, you do that from soul perception. You anticipate on the traffic from the field of feelings. You remember your first driving lesson. You know how that went. Why? Because you were driving from mind. You had to think, oh, I have to turn the wheel and now I have to do this. Everything was from mind. And once you're used to it, these programs come in soul. And once they're in soul, it's automatic. When you drive a car, you don't think about what you have to do. You just, automatically you do it. Because it's within soul perception. So soul is a very, very, very wide. And in daily life, all the time we are focused on the same things. On what we think. On what we perceive in the material world. And of superficial emotion. So you need a way to shift your attention from that sort of perceiving to perceiving this very deep unconscious state. Because the collective unconscious is very defining, you could say, for our reality. If you look in the human psyche, you can see there are certain images or qualities which are human. And you can activate these qualities. And by activating these qualities, you create that quality within yourself. Extremely useful. For instance, you see this back in many traditions around the world. In Tibetan Buddhism, what they do, they learn you to focus on certain Buddha images. And Buddha stands for the highest state of being. And the highest state of being has many qualities. Compassion, for instance, love, light, you name it. So, by focusing on these qualities in an image, in a certain state, you activate these things within yourself and you become more passionate. A very deep and profound way of giving shape to your life, to changing everything what's underneath there in this pyramid. Very useful. Very, very useful. And another very useful thing is that you could say that because this field, this collective unconscious, is collective, which means it's not so personal, that's why it doesn't have so much structure, because structure is, you could almost say it's another word for personal. So it's not so personal. Which means, by contacting these archetypes, you tap into a very large knowledge, you could say. A much wider field than your personal field. And that's very useful if you want to look at, for instance, your own situation from a very wide angle, from an elevated angle, from a deeper angle, from a perspective of love, a perspective of compassion, or whatever. Extremely useful, because your information and impulses will come from something which is bigger than what you call you. And in traditional shamanism, you would say you communicated with the spirits. Because we live in a, you could say, an industrial society. These things have a very different meaning for us. I think in an industrial society, the language is psychological. We think in psychological terms. If you live in a tribal society, then you much more live in a world in which you would describe it in the way that you experience it. You experience these things as spirits. It's exactly the same. But I think we live, as I said, in the 21st century. Our language is psychological. And the more you can relate to these things, the more you can do with it. And besides that, words like spirit world have a lot of association which not necessarily is very useful for you, because all these associations will make you perceive all these things in a certain way. So I call these things psychological, because that's the language we use in our society. But it's exactly the same as the spirit world, because the influences are bigger than you, are transpersonal.